Good morning, welcome to Putting CLIL into Practice, a series of overview videos of the content of the course in Plovdiv, July 2018. Today we're going to do a quick run through principles of identifying language in the CLIL classroom. And it's useful to consider three layers of language when a teacher is coming to look at identifying supporting language for learners of subjects through English as a foreign language. And those three layers I identify in the following way. We can look at firstly subject-specific language, so the language you can't do without when you're teaching a subject. If you're a biology teacher, that might be epithelial, when you're teaching about cells and tissues in the human organism. And all the words that tend to make up the glossary words in the back of a textbook, or the highlighted, bolded words on the page of a textbook, the subject-specific language, that subject cannot be taught without. Another layer of language is, secondly, general academic language, a language which tends to be less visible on the textbook page. And for that very reason, that it's less visible, one of the tasks of the CLIL teacher is to find that general academic language and make it visible, make it accessible on the page for learners, whether that's through handouts or board work or visualizing language in PowerPoint slides. We look at that in the course, visualizing and activating general academic language. And another layer of language which is useful to pay attention to is what I call peripheral language, the language of classroom chat and classroom management and interaction, outside task. Still, that's a level of language which, a layer of language which is useful for teachers to consider and moderate where necessary. When looking at general academic language and subject-specific language, the best source of input for that kind of language is the textbook itself, or the curriculum document and guidelines themselves. And I'm very privileged in writing resources for publishers. They send me their electronic versions of books to work with, to audit and find some of this language. And I've done that with science vocabulary series and geography vocabulary series for Macmillan Publisher. And I look through collections of textbooks to look at what the most frequently used words were in the textbooks, and create collections of themed vocabulary items based on their necessity in the theme and also their frequency of use, which is very important for teachers because they want their students to become fluent in the language of the subject. So they want them to talk like scientists and talk like geographers, and they need the language of the subject to be able to do that. We also look at ways of mapping language, ways of organising language, and we use concordancing software to identify this language and structure it and organise it. We use mind mapping software to look at creating themed organisations of vocabulary in the textbook in subject areas. So we get students to work with sections of maps for specific subject areas, and then editing these maps for their own purposes. Much better than the linear lists of vocabulary items that I was used to when I was a boy at school learning French and German, for example. We look at visualizing in other ways. We get students to think about annotating diagrams with subject-specific vocabulary, and using notes in two languages, explanations in their mother tongue if necessary, so that they become used to looking for essential vocabulary and handling it and managing it and organising it and memorising it to help them for work in the classroom. And there are many other aspects of this language that are important for some groups around the world. Pronunciation is one, for example. Apart from subject-specific language, we look at general academic language, and still in the mapping area, but this time concept mapping, we look at how to bridge subject-specific terms with general academic terms and create diagrams of whole texts using concept maps, and C-maps is a very good example of that. In fact, we can create diagrams of text for describing aspects of the subject curriculum. and that summarises all the language the students need, subject specific and general academic language. An example is language for classifying. The teacher can think about what that language is, what the subject demands of classification language before a lesson, prepare some of that language, decide where to put it in a lesson. Well, we talk about that. We talk about preparing for academic language in the classroom and inserting it, embedding it in task in the classroom. We look at peripheral language. We look at the language of the native speaker, and we look at the language of the non-native speaker, and look at what the right level is. And of course, the right level of language is the level just a little bit beyond the students are at in the classroom. And that may be bringing down slightly the level of the language of the native speaker towards the level of the students, or clarifying and scripting language perhaps of the non-native speaker teacher to challenge those more advanced language learners in the classroom. And we look at that as well. Those three levels of language, subject specific, general academic and peripheral language, are all at the heart of identifying language for the CLIL classroom on our course in Plovdiv, July 2018. Come and learn more.